The film begins with a group of tourists being welcomed to a museum in the middle of the desert. They are then shown a documentary about a famous woman named Nancy Archer. In the video, we see a doctor named Victor Loeb who handled Nancy's case. He explains that although the case is unusual, the events described in the story are entirely true. As the documentary starts, the scene shifts to the past. We see Nancy, a wealthy but troubled woman, trying to contact her husband at his office. The secretary does not know where he is, as he has disappeared under the pretense of a meeting. Nancy suspects that he is with his mistress again, but remains unaware. Later, she visits her personal psychiatrist, Dr. Pushing. Nancy explains that her husband Harry has already apologized for his affairs and promised not to repeat them. She says that it is difficult for a man like him who worked for her father to be married to a wealthy woman like her. That is why she is trying her best to save their marriage. Hearing this, Dr. Pushing feels sorry for Nancy and claims that she has low self-esteem. He advises her to prioritize herself, but she becomes uncomfortable and abruptly ends the session. In the evening, Nancy goes to a motel and sees Harry's car parked outside. This makes her furious because it means he is back with his mistress. She starts shouting his name, causing the motel owner to rush over to her. He insists that her husband is not there. Nancy does not believe him, but he somehow manages to calm her down and convince her to go home. As she leaves, Harry watches her from the window while his mistress Honey expresses her frustration. She calls Nancy a spoiled child and urges Harry to leave her as soon as possible. Harry agrees, but says he must first gain access to her family's wealth. He reveals that Nancy's father forced him to sign a prenuptial agreement, ensuring that he would not get any money in case of a divorce. Harry then reassures Honey that he loves only her, and the two continue their affair. Meanwhile, we see a heartbroken Nancy driving through the desert. Moments later, a blue light blinds her, forcing her to stop the car. Suddenly, a UFO appears, and a red laser beam hits the pendant she is wearing around her neck. When the laser disappears, she panics and flees the scene. A short time later, she returns to the motel and starts shouting for Harry again, but he does not come. Instead, two local sheriffs approach her and ask what is wrong. Still trembling with fear, Nancy tries to describe the UFO, but she fails to convince them of such a bizarre event. One of the sheriffs invites her to ride in their patrol car so they can check the site together. Meanwhile, a woman enters Harry's room and informs him about his wife's situation. She urges him to go home and take care of Nancy. However, the cunning Harry does not care about his wife and sees this as an opportunity to have her declared mentally ill. Back in the desert, Nancy desperately tries to find evidence that the spaceship was there, but it seems to have disappeared without a trace. This makes the sheriff believe that she has gone crazy. A few moments later, her wealthy father, Hamilton, arrives at the scene to pick her up. He strictly orders her to get into the car, and when Nancy tries to explain what she saw, he refuses to listen. The poor woman reluctantly complies, and on the way, Hamilton scolds her for her erratic behavior. He accuses her of acting like her late mother and warns her not to become mentally unstable again. Upon reaching home, Hamilton asks her to sign several documents as he wants to acquire the properties Nancy inherited from her deceased mother. Later, she goes to the attic and delights in the memories of her childhood toys. While flipping through her photo album, Harry suddenly appears and kisses her. Nancy confronts him about his deception and his false promises to end his affair with his mistress. However, he once again deceives her, claiming that he went to the motel only to break things off with Honey. Foolishly, Nancy believes him, and the two share a kiss in the end. The next day, Nancy tells Dr. Cushing about her supernatural experience. She fears that she is becoming like her mother and questions her own sanity. However, the doctor disagrees and reassures her that she is not her mother. She also believes Nancy's story about the UFO, which gives Nancy some relief. Later, Nancy has a private conversation with Harry, where she tells him about the spaceship from last night. Harry does not believe her story and suggests that she take some time away for treatment. Nancy suspects that he wants her to go to a mental hospital so he can enjoy himself again. However, she stands firm on what she saw and invites him to come with her that night to see for himself. Harry agrees and promises that if they find the spaceship, he and his father will publicly apologize to her. But if they don't, Nancy must agree to be admitted to a mental hospital. That night, the couple arrives in the desert and patiently waits for the aliens. For the first few hours, they see nothing, and Harry starts believing his wife has lost her mind. But then, the UFO suddenly appears, shocking him instantly. Nancy excitedly approaches the spaceship, but it traps her in a laser beam and takes her away. Harry cannot believe what he has just seen, but instead of reporting the incident to the authorities, he quietly returns home. Sometime later, Honey is in her room when she hears unusual noises on her roof. She carefully holds an axe and moves toward him. He is surprised as Nancy appears there and admires her name, saying she is a lovely woman. Suddenly, Nancy collapses to the ground, prompting Honey to rush to her aid. In the next scene, Nancy is brought home, where a thorough medical examination is conducted. Dr. Pushing believes she is suffering from an illness that causes hallucinations. However, all of Nancy's test results come back normal, confirming that she is fine. The strange thing is that Nancy has no memory of what happened last night. Her father begins to suspect that Harry left her there with ill intentions, but Harry denies it. Soon, the two men get into an argument. The old man accuses Harry of trying to harm his daughter. In response, Harry counters by claiming that Hamilton only pretends to care for his daughter so he can keep all the money for himself. He further alleges that Hamilton did the same to his wife, locking her away in a mental hospital where she received no proper care. Hearing this, Nancy finally reaches a breaking point in her frustration and yells at them to be quiet. This is the first time she has ever stood up to either of them. As she glares at them angrily, she feels her wedding ring tightening around her finger. Moments later, it shatters, causing her to fall back into her chair. Suddenly, Nancy's body begins to grow and her dress starts to tear apart. Terrified, she asks what is happening to her, but the other three can only stare in shock. Eventually, she transforms into a 50-foot-tall giant woman, her head crashing into the ceiling. By the next morning, Nancy is moved to a large stable near the house. Harry, seeking answers about her bizarre condition, brings in a renowned physician named Dr. Victor Loeb. Introducing himself, the doctor suggests placing her in a controlled medical facility. Realizing this is Harry's attempt to get rid of her, Nancy firmly refuses. Dr. Loeb insists, but when she threatens to harm him, he flees in fear. Later, Harry scolds Dr. Loeb for failing to convince her to go to the mental hospital. Loeb responds that dealing with her is difficult due to her immense strength. He also reveals that Nancy's new size is putting pressure on her heart, making any stress potentially fatal for her. Hearing this, Harry is delighted and starts devising a plan to push his wife into stress-induced cardiac arrest. As Nancy continues to grow, she becomes more confident and empowered by her newfound strength. One night, Hamilton gives her a document requiring her signature. Nancy questions how she can sign a tiny piece of paper now that she has grown in size. The old man explains that she can sign on cardboard and he will shrink it down to fit the documents. However, for the first time in her life, Nancy refuses. She demands that he enlarge the documents so she can read them before signing. Hamilton says he doesn't want to print the documents or make his business affairs public. However, Nancy has made it clear that she won't sign any contracts until she reviews what's written on the paper. The next evening, she arranges a romantic dinner for herself and Harry. Due to her enormous size, Nancy lifts him onto a delivery van. She then takes this opportunity to ask why he left her in the desert, but he claims he has no idea what she's talking about. Despite everything, Nancy still wants to be with him and shares ideas to strengthen their marriage. However, Harry rejects her efforts and starts saying intentionally hurtful things. He claims she's only with him for his money and that Honey is better at loving him. He even discusses his other affairs. Harry also accuses her cousin of being involved. Hearing all this, Nancy's blood pressure rises and she faints on the roof of a stable, causing it to collapse. Harry assumes she died of a heart attack and feels victorious. He immediately visits his mistress and surprises her with Nancy's diamond necklace. He informs her that Nancy is gone and that they can finally be together. This news excites Honey so much that she starts performing a seductive dance for him. However, unknown to them, Nancy suddenly wakes up when a flash of light hovers over her, possibly the same UFO. Enraged, she starts wandering around town looking for Harry. Seeing such a gigantic woman, the locals are shocked and flee in fear. A few moments later, Dr. Cush and Dr. Loeb approach her and ask her to stop. However, Nancy insists that she just wants to talk to her husband and nothing else. She continues walking through the town and eventually arrives in front of Honey's house. She grabs a gun to confront her, while Harry cowardly hides under a desk. But Nancy easily snatches the gun from her hands. Instead of hurting her, she tells Honey that she's a smart woman and advises her not to act like a fool. Taking advantage of the distraction, Harry tries to escape in his car, but Nancy immediately pulls him out. As she continues to terrify the townspeople, 2 National Guard helicopters arrive to stop her. A pilot orders her to release her husband, but she refuses and instead runs toward the desert. Upon arriving, Nancy finds her father waiting for her. Using a megaphone, he angrily orders her not to embarrass him further and to end this madness. Nancy not only refuses, but also publicly reveals her plan to use her money to buy the town. At this moment, the National Guards become concerned about her unexpected behavior, so they open fire on her. Nancy manages to avoid the shots, but eventually gets hit and falls onto power lines. Due to the impact, high voltage current flows through her body, rendering her unconscious. However, just as she is on the brink of death, a UFO appears once again to save her. It shines its blue light on Nancy and takes her away along with Harry. Seeing this, everyone is shocked and realizes that Nancy was not lying about the UFO. Later, a reporter interviews Dr. Cush about the events and asks where Nancy might be. The doctor replies that although he has no idea, he is happy that Nancy now has Harry. In the final scene, we see Harry in a medical chamber aboard the spaceship with 2 other husbands. He still refuses to acknowledge his negative traits, face, claiming how perfect and masculine he is. Just then, Nancy arrives with 2 other giant women and scolds him, telling him to take the session seriously. She asks him to reflect on his behavior on Earth and shuts the spaceship door, bringing the film to an end.